This is New England Soccer Weekly with Tom Quinlan, Nick Giuliano, and Mike DeSilva on 790 The Score.
What's that?
That's the start of the show.
It sounds a lot better than what I watched on Sunday night. Welcome
Sound
into
like
New
a
England.
Legion of Doom.
We have another professional guest waiting, and that's how you're going to start the show?
Fantastic.
I know. Thank God that we actually said hello before we actually this wasn't our first introduction, wasn't my Legion of Doom impersonation.
Gotcha.
But yes, we come into this week four. Week four? Week four of the regular season with the Revolution coming off of their first loss of the year, losing 4-0 to LAFC. Probably not a game that actually defines this team for many different reasons. The biggest reason of all, Carlos Hill, not available versus LAFC.
Out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere, shockingly, the other night. So we'll see what the heck is going to happen this weekend. We're recording before Bruce speaks today, we're recording on Thursday before Bruce speaks to the media, so maybe there will be an update that might change by the time you watch this broadcast. But right now, Carlos Hill listed as questionable on the injury report. And let's talk more about this upcoming weekend's matchup with Lori Lindsey, who is on the call for this weekend between as the Revs host Nashville SC. Lori, how are you? Welcome to Providence.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me on. Good to be chatting with you all.
So, I don't know if you got a chance to watch that Revs 4-0 debacle the other night, but without Carlos Hill, I think it's very hard to gauge where this team is, especially so early in the season.
Yeah, certainly. And I did watch the game as a fan, but also for prep for this game as well. So, I would like to hear that sound that you made again.
That doesn't sound anything like
Oh, my God. Yeah.
That was impressive. But yeah, I have I guess as more of a neutral, right? Like I thought the first, before the penalty kick, I thought it was a pretty even game. And I thought there were some really good moments from the Revs. So a little bit of a different take probably from my perspective. But also, the end result, not what they would want.
Well, you look at a team like LAFC, you see why it's the class of the league right now. And even without Carlos Hill, to your point, once Bo committed the foul, once that PK happened and it's 1-0, the whole game shifted, not in New England's favor.
Yeah, certainly. And listen, yes, you're exactly right. LAFC, top notch, right? Got it done again last night in Champions League. So yes, they're flying high. And I think, as you mentioned, it's too early, right? It is too early. It's been a good start for the Revs as well, going into that game, obviously 2-0. So, but like any league, any sport this early on, just about taking one game at a time, really.
Yeah, and obviously LAFC, a very offensive-minded team. They had no problem scoring against the Revolution last weekend. Going up this weekend now with Nashville, a more defensive-minded team. How much of that do you have to change in your prep? Are you going into a game last week with a completely different practice routine or whatever it may be, or preparation if you're Bruce Arena, or are you kind of just sticking to the plan or even into this weekend against Nashville?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. I think it's about sticking with the plan. And as we mentioned early on in the season, so you're focusing on yourself. Yes, there's one eye on the opponent and what they bring. And you're exactly right. These are two very different styles of play, right? Especially with a national team that typically would go on a road, be more defensive minded. So I think the biggest change is how aggressive are the Revs going to be at home? And what does that look like when you are in possession of the ball in case when the ball does turn over to Nashville, they're very good in transition. So what does your shape look behind the ball just to make sure that you're protecting yourself defensively? Because I imagine this game is going to be a bit more offensive-minded for the Revs throughout the 90 minutes. More possession, the ability to build up, and then that's what Nashville is going to be looking for, just those moments to capitalize on. So it's more about the preparation and the individuals taking another step forward, and the team taking another step forward, but also just understanding what the opposition is going to present to you.
And I think that's what we've seen in the past when the Revs have played Nashville. Nashville knows how to pack it in, and they know how to pick those moments and find the Revs where they're vulnerable.
That's right. The Revolution haven't beaten Nashville in 5 games.
And that's that midfield transition where you just, in the past, you've had nobody there to help Matt Polster. You might have somebody there now with Latif Blessing, and you mentioned that, and I agree with you. I didn't think the Revs looked all that bad. Even after the Bo penalty that was given up and after LAFC goes up 1-0, the Revs were able to hold on to, at least striking distance of keeping LA within arm's reach. A couple of nice moments offensively. And I feel like the thing that stuck out to me, what kept the Revs in that match early on, Latif Blessing. I think he just adds a completely different dynamic to this midfield that I think we've been asking, who's going to be that guy that plays next to Matt Polster? I think Tommy Mack has done a serviceable job, but I think you needed something there. And it kind of feels like Latif Blessing might be that guy, and he's really shown himself in 2 games here.
Yeah, certainly. And also I think it's not that the Revs aren't used to winning. That's not the case at all. But, he's coming off of a championship year. So you're bringing that understanding as well, just the grind of an MLS season. And also just the fact that he's like top caliber midfielder in this league. That's just going to bring a little bit of a different dimension. I also think you can add Buck into that equation. I mean, obviously there's been a lot of talk that he's a young guy, but he looks like a veteran player out there. And in some ways too, just even as we were talking before we hopped on, like I was just watching the Charlotte New England, the very first game of the season. And obviously we've seen them play in the diamond in the midfield, but I kind of think it's interesting when Polster and Buck play next to each other, because I think it gives Polster the ability to get forward more, because Buck will hold. So I think that in itself gives another dimension to the team. But I don't know if that's essentially what you go with, like a 4-2-3-1 in this game against the Nashville, maybe, right? Depending, just given that they're probably going to, I don't really like to say it pack in, but they're just going to be stingy defensively, right? So.
Well, that's just to expand on that. You look at this Nashville defense, haven't given up a goal yet the entire year. Watching that game against Montreal, it's not going to work aerially. It's not going to work on a counter. So is the Revolution's best plan of attack here 1-2 touch to try to spring balls behind? I think that's the only way you're going to beat this team with Zimmerman in the middle like that.
Yeah, certainly. I think 1 and 2 touch, to your point, but also patience. And I think at times, hoping that Carlos Gil's back, right? Because I think he's the type of player in these moments that do unlock these defenses. Because yes, 1 and 2 touch to move the oppositions defensively, but then you need somebody that has. And Latif Blessing, I think, could fall into this category as well. Somebody that's going to take on 1v1, dribble, right? Because defenses like Nashville are typically set up for a passing style teams just to make sure you cut off any sort of passing angles. So if you have somebody then that's willing to drive at a back line, drive at the midfield, then that just presents a different option for other players to open up in different angles, right?
That could be where Barrero comes in too.
Yeah, he's been good.
Well, I think that's he's been like the piece that they were missing when Tajon left, right? Because you needed that winger that could take a guy on one-on-one outside and be creative and kind of free ball when he's out there, and Carlos Gil free them up a little bit, because I felt like that's really what they were missing last year, was that creativity, a guy out in the wing that could really kind of make something happen. And, without having, especially when Buxo left last year, not having a true number 9, not having a goal scorer, he's been the game changer. Do you see that as being kind of like in the first 3 games, the guy that's kind of made the biggest difference on this team in regards to their offensive prowess, if you will?
Yeah, I do, actually. And I think it's been interesting because regardless of the formation that they play, I mean, if they're in the 4-2-3-1, then he's going to be on the left side, right? But I even think it's interesting when they do play in a 2 front. His movement causes problems because he naturally wants to drift left. So I think that allows for players like we saw Bo play as like the attacking midfield against LAFC. Then he can drive forward, right? So it just asks, I think, more questions defensively of teams, who's going to step, who's going to pick up. And that goes back to kind of what we were saying in terms of a Nashville team that we know is stingy. They're going to be tight between the lines. So do you have that movement of Barrero to be able to pull teams out defensively, widen those spaces between the back 4? And I think he could be, I've enjoyed what he's brought to this team, but I also think he could be a key element in this game.
Yeah. While we're on this subject, I just find it interesting. I think one of the biggest question marks we have, and we've pretty much had through the offseason for this team, is what is Gustavo Bo's role going to be? I feel like because of this game, Hill was out. He kind of filled that number 10 position, but at this point in his career, he can't really play on the wing, doesn't like getting back too much. And if Bruce really likes sticking with kind of that lone striker, where does he fit on this Revolution team? Which is wild to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the $1 million question, right? So, and it might be somewhere floating in between, because if they are playing with a lone striker, then yeah, where do you put him? Because he's not necessarily a winger, right? But I think if you do play a two front, then that presents a different option, because he would be somebody that could play an in between, right?
Right.
Somebody that's going to float back and almost be quote unquote a second 10 at times, but then also push the line. So I think that's advantageous to potentially the way that this Revs team wants to play. But ultimately, I think that could shift, and it's probably like one of the greatest gifts for the Revs to be able to have a few different formations that they can slide in and out of. But then also it does present the problems of like, okay, where do some of these players play? To what I was saying about like a Polster and a Buck, to me, they seem a pretty good natural fit playing almost next to one another, but then you are playing a lone striker, so somebody's missing out, right? So
The one name that we haven't mentioned. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying there's a lot to work with there.
Well, I mean, you would like to have more to work with, but the problem is one of your designated players isn't starting right now. Back-to-back games, Giacomo Vrioni is on the bench for the Revs and gets 30 minutes of action. Now, Bruce is talking about, he still needs time to adjust to the league, and it's different for guys that come over from Europe or anybody that's really an international that's coming into MLS. It's a different type of adjustment. You can only do so much talking to save this guy. You're a designated player. You're supposed to come in here and produce automatically.
I feel like this is the same thing with Buxo. I feel like we're Groundhog Day deja vu all over again. When he
but
first
at least
started,
Buxo
you
was
had the
starting.
But not the whole time. You had the same exact thing. You have to give these players time to
He's also
adjust.
coming off an injury, he
Yes.
came here hurt. I think that.
I'm not saying he's Buxo. I'm just saying you're doing the same thing that you did with Buxo.
But this feels worse to me because in a game like Sunday night, when you don't have Carlos Hill, you don't have your star playmaker, you're relying on a Gustavo Bo, who, let's be honest, at this point, probably not a designated player, even though he's got that designated player tag. They probably could buy him down to TAM money, if you want to go into the mental gymnastics of trying to understand MLS roster rules. But regardless, your main designated player guy right now is Giacomo Vrioni. The fact he does not start on Sunday night against LAFC, the premier team in the league, in a game that MLS is showcasing, I think that to me sends up some warning signals. Lori, what do you think?
yeah, I would agree. I mean, anytime that you're spending that amount of money, you have a DP, the expectation is to produce, right? And if they're not starting in a game against what would be one of the biggest cross-conference rivals, essentially, then yeah, I would tend to agree with you. That is.
So what is it with Giacomo then? Is it he's going to need more time? Is it it's flabbergasting to me. I mean, granted, everything that Bruce Arena has done here for the past, 4 years now that we've been covering this guy, nothing's ever made sense to begin with, so don't try to make sense of it. But this one seems like a layup.
At Tommy_Quinlan IV.
Yep.
_IV.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't know, right? I don't know. We just know that there hasn't been the production that you would want out of a DP, right? And especially to your point where you have some other names and some other big time players that have been injured, Carlos Hill, and then having to come back off. So we'll see where he is, hopefully get a better idea today if he can play. But then that is essentially two DPs, one injured, one is unclear of if it's production or working his way back, that you don't have on the field, right? And I think at that point in time, then yes, that poses a big issue for your team in terms of production and what we're asking from that front line. Because defensively,
they're pretty good.
yeah, they're really good. I mean, you have two of the best outside backs in the league partnership. They're going to be aggressive getting forward. I mean, it has all of the ingredients for a really fantastic team, right? On both sides of the ball. It's just a matter of getting that production and
How
I
much
don't
stock do you put in having three central defenders essentially that could be starters in Romney, Andrew Farrell, and Henry Kessler? And what's the update on Farrell, by the way?
Farrell's back in training, so he was talking to the media earlier this week. He's slowly getting back into it. I think you'll still see Romney and Kessler, but at some point, to Mike's point, you could see a formation that features Farrell, Romney, and Kessler, and go with three in the back.
You
talk about
and Jones to play
put
a
him
little
up
bit higher.
top. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think again, anytime, and even Farrell will say, because I was listening to some of his media, I think it was from yesterday or the day before, he was saying there hasn't been competition back there because he's been injured, right? So it has been, and rightfully so, Romney and Kessler, and those are the two as he continues to work his way back. But I think with the grind of MLS and the ability to be able to shift formations depending, I think Farrell coming back, obviously experienced player, somebody you want on that back line. It gives them options to be able to adjust. And then, if Veroni isn't the player that you're hoping, then you have the ability to move other players around, as you said, right? Getting players higher up the field. So I think there's still, fourth game, right? Sure. And there's no panic button or anything. I think, in fact, there's a lot of bright spots ahead in terms of it's just going to be about finding that mix of players and keeping players healthy, which lends to the fact that like bringing Farrell back, getting him healthy, the competition within the team in general for spots is a good thing, but also then you have wiggle room over the longevity of the season.
Well, let's move to that Nashville team offensively. Mukhtar, obviously, in the middle, and MVP. You got MVP versus MVP, hopefully, on Saturday night. But watching that game back against Montreal, Lori, a player that I was really impressed with, Jacob Schaufelberg on the left side. It seemed like a lot of play from Nashville in that counter went through that left side. So that defense is going to have to be aware of those two players in particular.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things, too, where and we'll see what happens, but I expect that the Revs will have a decent amount of possession, right? They'll have the ability to what we were saying, be patient, find some different combination play in their attack. But it does leave them, especially with outside backs to the Revs getting forward, Bai and Jones, susceptible to those counters, right? And particularly Bai on the right side where Nashville looked to exploit. So I think it's just about being mindful of that and the positioning of Kessler in particular on that right side, and Romney as well, though, will be important because obviously they also know Teal very well, former Revs player.
Yeah, that translated against Montreal, too. I think they had like 63% of the possession, 8 shots, none on goal. That's just what Nashville does. So the Revolution are going to have to pick their spots well in that offensive third. And you mentioned Teal. It's going to be nice to see Teal. It was tough
nice to see Teal again.
When I watched that game back, that was tough because I forgot that he was on Nashville. And then you see him run, I'm like, man, I miss Teal.
And then you have Romney, who's like former Nashville guy, right?
Yeah,
so you got
exactly.
You got a little bit of switching going on.
Like a little revenge game.
Yeah, exactly.
Romney revenge game, which I don't even think it is, but that's what. Well, I guess we'll coin it that. Why not?
Yeah, there, but it would be cool. It's always interesting when you see guys, and obviously Teal was a staple here in the community. He did a ton in the community here in Providence and New England as a whole. So that'll be interesting.
Well, Laura, you mentioned we're talking about Romney. You covered this Nashville team. Why do you think in 3 games he's fit in so well with this New England back four?
Yeah, I think he's steady, right? I mean, we saw the partnership with him and Zimmerman from day one in Nashville and how steady they've been. I mean, that has been kind of the storyline of Nashville. They built their team, Inter Miami coming in at the same year as they did. That looked very different in terms of the way those two teams went about building, or those two organizations went about building their rosters. And so Nashville has really, got it down defensively from their existence in this league. And Romney was a huge part of that. So I think in terms of just his, it's a good understanding of the game, but also just a steady player who's plays within himself. And I think that's what you want from a center back. I mean, yes, you have the ability to do some things that are unexpected, but the reliability, I think, is the key in that. And I think that's why he's been able to just slip right in.
So we've been loving the MLS Season Pass. We're a big fan of it. The interface is incredible. As somebody who's been following MLS since 1996, it's really cool to have this unique experience, and it looks beautiful. We've had a chance to talk to a few of you now, and everybody's been so great. You did mention before we started recording here, though, Lloyd, Sam, you guys share something or a bond, if you will, with some clothing choices. Now, we didn't really get into it. I wanted to save it. So what are some things you guys kind of bonded when it comes to the closet there?
Oh, yeah. Well, listen, we've never met in person, Lloyd Sam and I, but I am a huge fan, and I love his commentary. I think you can feel the joy that he brings to the game and his love of the game come through, and just all around cool guy, right? So I'm sure I'm a bigger fan of his than he even knows, right? So like the creepy social media coworker over here. But yeah, no, I think one of the things, like, I'm huge into fashion. It's clear that he is as well. And we were just exchanging a few DMs the other day and wishing that we were on camera to show it off. But I appreciate his social media because he does show us his outfits daily and where he's going out. And yeah, so it's good.
I do want to ask you before we let you go, we appreciate all the time for today as we talk with Lori Lindsey from MLS Season Pass. Your thoughts on the NWSL and the growth of women's soccer in this country? You know, where do you think it's going, and, you know, what would you like to see more of?
Yeah, well, my goodness, the growth is just endless, right? I mean, we are seeing that globally. We're seeing that in NWSL. And I think with the NWSL, obviously, we've had some tough times, right? And it does feel like it's going to be the 11th season. It feels like a new decade as well for the league. And I mean, the play is outstanding. The competition's outstanding. And I would just like those stories to continue to be told of the players and be more household names, and you know, facilities continue to grow. We're seeing that in Kansas City. They're building they already have their training facility, but they're also building the very first woman soccer stadium in downtown Kansas City. So, I mean, we're seeing and the players that they brought in this season, which will just be their third year of existence under the new ownership. So, I mean, what they've been able to do in a short amount of time, when you have the resources, put them into these players, is just outstanding. So, yeah, tune in. The games are awesome. Go to games. You know, there's rumors that Boston's going to get a team again. I used to love playing in Boston, so yes,
it's definitely needed here.
Well.
We need it. I see some of the environments of some of the other games, you know, across the country. It's like we need that over here, and it would make sense. Like, it's where it belongs here.
Well, you look at Portland, and that leads me to my next point. Should MLS do what the NBA does with the WNBA? Should MLS have some responsibility to help grow the NWSL? Because with the supporters culture that we have with MLS, I mean, fans are more engaged with soccer than ever, and they're consuming everything. And you see it with and Portland's might be an anomaly because, you know, they're such a soccer hotbed, but it feels like if you get with the right markets, MLS could really do a lot to help grow NWSL because of the supporter cultures that are built in. You know, if for example, if there was a Revs, let's just say if there was a Revs women's team, right, and you inherit, you know, all of the Revs fans, and they do that with the Arsenal ladies, and you do that with Manchester City and Chelsea. So do you think MLS should have a larger role with working with the NWSL?
I don't feel that is a broad stroke yes. I think if it's suited for that market and both of the teams are in like complete agreement of what that looks like in terms of the growth, then great. But I also think that you're seeing Kansas City, for instance, like, I mean, just the aggression and like the excitement of the ownership group on where they want to go. It's not partnered with Sporting KC at all, right? In fact, it's completely opposite. There is an already like just a deep richness of like a fan base in Kansas City and like soccer enthusiasts, and it's about tapping into that, right? But no, I don't think that's just across a broad stroke statement that MLS needs to be involved. If it makes sense and those two parties think that it makes sense and they're going to work well together, then great. But we've also seen that not be the best situation. So what I can say to this is that it is an untapped market completely still, even though we're seeing a ton of growth with women's soccer. It is untapped, and it is such a fantastic investment with the level of play, the athletes that are involved, and I think it would make sense for some MLS teams to be involved because I don't think it will just be like MLS helping NWSL, right? I think this is like 100% of a two-way street. Yeah. And just to add one other thing too, I think we see in the MLS, you're seeing former players in coaching positions, more in general managers sporting director role. And we're really starting to see that on the women's side now. And I think to your question a second ago, that is something I think that would be wonderful to continue on the women's side, because for a long time we hadn't had that, right? And to see former players be involved in our pro league, I think is what's helping grow.
And you have the Women's World Cup coming up this summer in Australia, so that's going to be a lot of things that we're going to be looking forward to, and hopefully that'll be something we talk to you about as we get into the summer months.
Yeah.
We'll have to have you back.
Certainly. Thanks for having me on.
MLS season passes. Lori Lindsey joining us on New England Soccer Weekly.
Watch a game on Apple Saturday night.
Right.
Watch it on Apple Saturday night, Lori, and we look forward.
Looking forward to your outfit now. I mean,
Yeah.
Is this be a social media thing? Like, am I going to have to make sure I'm checking in and seeing if I'm up to par or what?
Now I feel sweaty. I got to really live up to this. My goodness.
It's you, Lori, and Lloyd. You got to see who's got the better
Well,
fit.
I mean,
All right.
Oh no! Listen,
Lloyd.
Lloyd is taking that win. Okay,
I'm
easily.
third tier in
Don't
that
get me wrong
situation,
here.
but that's fine by me.
I'm just saying, if you need an extra MLS show, Lori and Lloyd is a great TV name.
Not bad.
Oh yes, you heard it here first. Let's do it.
I
Come
love
on, get
that.
Lloyd and I back on here together. I'd love that.
Lori
That'd be
Lindsey,
great.
thank you so much for coming on to the program.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, John Chesto from the Boston Globe coming up next. Are the Revs finally going to get their soccer stadium?
We'll find out.
More noises.
All right, welcome on back to New England Soccer Weekly. I am Tom Quinlan, Nick Giuliano, Mike DeSilva. Boys, how are we?
Doing great.
Doing
Good
great,
to be back.
Tommy.
Good to be back.
When I tell you one Boston city that I never, or one city that's around the Boston area that I never want to step in, what would that area be?
Well, Tom, I'm going to go with the hashtag you've been using for, I don't know,
And you've
4 or
been the
5
only one
years.
using this hashtag.
Hashtag Neverett.
Neverett.
As Tom Quinlan calls it. So
It-
eloquently.
Drives me up the wall that people think this is the Boston Stadium savior, but whatever. I'll maybe save that for another day. Our guest at this time is the man who's been following the Neverett beat, maybe the new stadium home for your New England Revolution, John Chesto from the Boston Globe, joining us on New England Soccer Weekly this week. John, welcome on into Providence. Thank you for the time today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so break
I like
down.
that hashtag. Even I have
You
a
were
soft spot
thrusted
for
into
Everett, I
this.
guess,
We
but
thrusted
I'm-
you. The Revs
yeah.
fans thrusted you into the stadium conversation for years
It's
now.
true.
This
It's
is
true. That's right.
When the stadium news breaks,
It's
you're going to
funny
be the
how
first
I've-
one to break it.
I hope so. That's the goal. So, what do you want me to explain what's going on in Everett here?
Yeah,
There's
so
a big
take-
news that happened this week.
Take us through what Wynn did, the land that they bought, and now the process of the. I don't know if you got to put out a RFP if you're Wynn here. Sort of the next steps of how Wynn is going to look to use the land at this energy site that they bought a couple days ago.
So, Wynn Resorts, obviously, they have a very, very large casino. They spent almost $3 billion to build across the street from this land in Everett, and they built it in 2019. And around that same time, talked about where the Revs Stadium would go has sort of shifted to Everett. I think it helped that that the casino had opened and that Wynn was definitely going to stay in charge of it. There was some question of that originally. So the property across the street, there's a giant power plant complex across the street, and most of it is not used. So the company, Constellation Energy, put the part that's not used up for sale. Notably, the city of Everett basically said, we're going to take that by eminent domain if you don't put it up for sale. They kind of forced Constellation's hand. So they put it up for sale. Not surprisingly, Wynn was the highest bidder. There were a number of bids, but Wynn came through for $25 million for this. It's 45 acres. By Boston prices, that's a really good deal.
like a
But
bargain.
you've got to take down old power plant structure. You got to clean up the ground. You got to clean up the river. It's a lot of work, and to really develop it, it's within what's called a designated port area, which limits what you can do there to essentially marine industrial uses. So they have to either get the legislature to pull that out of the designated port area through legislation, or to go through a pretty complicated, prolonged regulatory process with the State Office of Coastal Zone Management to get it out of the designated port area. So there's a little uncertainty about what could happen there. But Wynn Resorts has every reason to sort of say, we spent $3 billion on this casino, say, rounding up. We're spending another $1 billion or so on development across the street, right next to where this power plant. We have every reason to spend another $25 million to secure this pivotal piece of land to make sure we have control over what happens there. So Wynn and the Crafts have a long relationship, and they have been talking, and Wynn would love it if they could get the Crafts to finally pull the trigger on a soccer stadium there. I don't quite know how the financing would work. I don't think that I think they have been in conversations. I think that if they can get the DPA issue, designated port issue, resolved, and so that you could allow a soccer stadium to be built there, I think that would help things along a bit in terms of when getting the soccer stadium to sort of anchor a mixed-use development. It wouldn't just be a soccer stadium. I mean, you'd have waterfront restaurants and maybe hotels and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So you laid out a lot there, and you mentioned that Wynn has been in conversations with the Crafts here. Would Wynn pony up any money to now build the stadium? Because for me, here's the way I see it, John. And you tell me if you agree as a business reporter, not even from a sports standpoint. Why would Kraft, who I think Patriot Place, barely breaks even every year when we look at it, he's got his own mega mall down in Foxborough. Why would he want to go build up in Everett to go help fund another billionaire where really it feels like to me Wynn gets the better of the deal having that stadium come in? It feels like Kraft is going to save Wynn because, I mean, for all intensive purposes, I hear people go to the Encore Casino, but I don't think it's a game changer for Everett. Kraft going into Everett is a game changer not just for Wynn, but for Everett as well.
I just had this conversation with my editor yesterday. The finances of building a stadium are tricky. It's why we haven't seen a Rev Stadium. One of the reasons why we haven't seen a standalone Rev Stadium. I think, for the Crafts to recoup their investment, they're going to need to get some sort of subsidy, and there's not going to be a state or local subsidy, or at least not a significant one. So I assume there's some sort of arrangement worked with Wynn. I don't think that we're maybe, and I don't have inside information. This is me just guessing. Sure. Maybe there's some, maybe they get below market rate for that land, or maybe there's a revenue sharing agreement for that property, so that the onus isn't entirely on the Crafts to spend whatever $300-400 million it costs to build a stadium, because they're not going to do that without some assistance. So I'm sure they're figuring out a way to make it easier on the Crafts to go there.
What's the state's role in this? Because there's two parts of this where I look at it. It's the state legislature, where last year they tried to create a special tax to try to maybe start to get this process going to get that stadium in that area. And then the second part of this, the environmentalists have been going after Kraft for a while. If it's not the unions that have gone after Kraft with the Bayside Expo Center in 2017, it's been the environmentalists and the greenies that are worried about the rising sea levels. And I saw that play out firsthand with the Whittitt Circle property. And granted, that wasn't what you mentioned in your article, but there was rumors about them looking at Whittitt Circle for a while. And now when I see this, you talk about the port issue, kind of feels like the environmentalists would also play a factor into this as well. So talk about that.
Well, the state, I think it's going to be a big question is, like in some states, they offer subsidies for stadiums. That's going to be a tough sell in Massachusetts. I mean, we saw what happened back now like 25 years ago,
especially with the Healy millionaire tax.
Exactly. I don't see that happening, but we do need, for any real development to happen there, you need either the Office of Coastal Zone Management, which falls under the Healy administration, to usher this through. And that's one of those agencies that everything's by the book, or else they get sued. So Healy could call them up and say, please wave this through tomorrow. But if they did, they would find themselves sued by a Conservation Law Foundation, for example. So they have to, it's going to take a couple years to go that route. The better route for everybody is to get this through the legislature, but they still need the Conservation Law Foundation to not raise a stink on Beacon Hill, to say, okay, we bless this. Conservation Law Foundation is concerned about three things. They're concerned about rising seas and resiliency, and they're going to want to, they're obviously going to want to see resiliency as part of this project. And I think the Crafts obviously and Wynn would want to see that as well, because the Wynn and Crafts are here for the long haul, so they don't want to be flooded. The Conservation Law Foundation is concerned about the designated port areas. Believe it or not, they are a defender of these port areas. They want to keep the industry here. They do not want to see industry wiped out by condos, etc. So they are sort of the last vanguard to make sure everyone is on the up and up with and protects the designated port areas, because otherwise, once they're gone, they're never coming back. And there's something called Chapter 91, which is a tidelands development regulation that limits, if you're in tidelands, how high your building can be and the mass of that building close to the water. So there are ways around that if you agree to public concessions or public open space, and they're going to want to see those concessions, or they're going to want to see the stadium move further from the water out to avoid the Chapter 91 issues. The original legislation that you talked about did two things. It bypassed the DPA, the designated port area restrictions, and it bypassed Chapter 91. And the Conservation Law Foundation, they went to war to stop that. They're like, that's crazy that you're doing that. You're giving this for this property. So if they can kind of pull back some of those concessions and make it, it might make it easier to reach a deal with the Conservation Law Foundation.
What's the probability you think that something gets done here?
The probability I give event that some mixed use development happens there and it gets removed from the DPA. I give that 75% at least. Wynn will build something eventually. They're already starting to build other phases of expansion there on the other side of the street. And this will be phase 4. They have phase 1, 2, and 3 of their expansion. This will be phase 4, and it's on the river, and it'll be great someday. They can wait it out. This is the best I've seen, the closest I've seen for the soccer stadium, but the DPA issue is a really tough issue to get around. So I'm giving it 50-50 that the soccer stadium gets done here.
Well, when you and I first got introduced, there was the chase that was going around. Is Kraft looking at Whitted Circle? I'm going to leave Everett for a second here. Why is it that you think and I get it, land is a premium in Boston, but it seems like Mayor Marty Walsh, now former Labor Secretary Marty Walsh, wanted to get a stadium downtown in the city. It was kind of a make good for not getting the Olympics here. So why do you think being within the city limits died?
It's interesting. The biggest opposition that Marty Walsh faced was from the current mayor, Michelle Wu, and from the environmentalists. You mentioned how the environmental groups are worried about flooding at Whitted Circle. The reality was their bigger concerns were about the tow lot and the public works yard, which is sort of the next property up from Whitted Circle. That's the city. You see a big giant pile of salt there. It's some giant buildings. You can see it from the highway, but it's short distance from the T. And it would have been a good spot for a soccer stadium, except it is considered crucial to preventing flooding once we get sea level rise, because it's up against the bottom, the southern portion of the 4-Point Channel. And so Marty Walsh wanted to put that land out for bid because it was city-owned land. He never publicly said that the Crafts were going to bid, but they had to. You have to offer it to everyone. You can't just make a sweetheart deal for the Crafts with city-owned land. And Michelle Wu basically stalled it out in a city council committee and said, we should be building, we should have green resiliency measures there, parks. We should think about affordable housing. I don't want to see a stadium. Why should we be doing a stadium there? We should do things that the city really needs. And so that's why it died. They did come close with Bayside Expo. And that ran into some political issues there. That property is owned by UMass, and it's not that far from the Whitted Circle Public Works Yard area. Those are probably the two places within the city of Boston that they came closest to.
John Chesto from the Boston Globe giving us the update on what's happening in Everett. We'll have you on in the future when things get a little bit more progressive. John, thank you so much.
All right, I look forward to it. Of course. It's good to see you.
Thanks, John.
All right, final segment of New England Soccer Weekly. Thank you so much to John Chesto and Lori Lindsey for coming on today. Who would have known Michelle Wu sunk the stadium at Whitted Circle? Shocker.
Definitely not me.
Anyways, it's nice to be back in our TV studio this week. Mike, Nick, it's relaxing to sit in these chairs.
Yes,
have these lights
this week
on
it
us.
is, yes.
Good vibe.
Yeah,
Last
good
week,
vibes.
not so relaxing.
Last week we were here, and
But you know what? There had to have been something in the water last week because
full moon.
I mean, everybody was feeling it. I mean, Bruce had a terrible night out in Los Angeles, California. And if you're somebody that got into the sports betting last week, or you probably haven't just gotten into it.
Tough beat.
But if you did online betting last week and
Sucker
you
bet.
put on some money on the Revs because LAFC
Well, we even
had
said it on
Champions
the
League
show.
this week.
It was plus 500, and I thought that was a good bet, but not knowing the MVP wasn't going to be playing in the game, that kind of changes things a little
It was
bit.
a sucker bet.
Well, here's the thing.
I might have gotten
Yeah.
duped myself.
Did you happen to bet
I
on?
did. I put some money on the Revs.
Did you get plus 500 or plus 650?
plus
Because
five-
I think
I
it
got-
went up to
I
650,
got
right?
plus
It did.
500. It was before the Carlos Hill news came out, and the game was on. It was on late for me. I watched the recap the next day. Thanks,
Which is a
to-
great thing about Apple, is you
Apple.
can go back and watch all of these
Shout
games.
out to,
They have an 8-minute like highlight package, or you can watch the full game, which is a game changer.
So shout out to MLS Season Pass for that. But I do gotta say, waking up to finding not only did I completely miss on that bet, but it couldn't have been close. That was tough. That was a tough line night for the handicappers, that is sports books in Massachusetts.
Well, here's the thing.
Doesn't
Bruce
count.
Arena is under the spotlight now because for a while, us great unwashed swine in the New England soccer
Speak for
media
yourself.
have been pointing out that Bruce Arena is not necessarily the most transparent person when it comes to letting people know what injury statuses
Well,
are. And granted, this is an MLS problem,
That's what I
but
was
we
not
definitely
to,
deal
not
with
to
this.
make an excuse for him, but this is the league that has these things in place, right? He doesn't have to be forthcoming with that.
Correct, but now with
Again, I'm not saying he should or shouldn't. I'm just saying that's part of what he's abiding by the rules.
well, it's going to be interesting to see how much Bruce goes under the spotlight for not providing the most transparent injury reports.
Or
if
the
he can
league.
still get away with this, or if the league can still get away
Sure.
with this, because Forbes magazine, Ian Nicholas Quillen, not Quinlan, Quillen, had this article
Yeah,
for
when
Forbes.
This
Forbes,
sounds like a pen name. Is this you?
No, it's not me.
Okay.
you're a ghostwriter.
I wish I was a ghostwriter.
Wait, what's
I'm not
your
that
name?
talented.
What's your name?
Tom Quinlan.
Okay, and this person's name?
Ian Quillen.
Okay.
Okay. Headline: Massachusetts.
Sounds pretty sus.
Headline: Massachusetts bettors get a rude introduction to shoddy MLS injury reports.
By the way, I know you said this. This is Forbes, so it's not. This is a pretty high class publication that's writing this.
yeah, this is not like it's
This guy or girl definitely had money on the Revs last weekend.
Or Tom.
Yeah. Or it's Ian Quillen, Tom Quinlan.
Yeah, exactly. But anyways, pretty much, if you're just a casual fan of watching the Revs and you wanted to just get some action in on New England soccer the other night, you're going in there thinking, oh, like you said, Revs are plus 650 in this match. You got Carlos Hill on the side.
At 100 to win 650.
Exactly. And then if you threw down that hundo,
Responsible.
Always responsibly.
then you were kind of sidetracked. Here's where I think this is where MLS and maybe Bruce Arena is going to be put under the spotlight. Here's what Ian had to write, not me. These kind of lapses are all too common in MLS. This is talking about Carlos Hill being left off the injury report, which still doesn't have a serious injury reporting policy. Teams are asked to include a player availability report in their game notes, but those reports reflect a snapshot several days out from kickoff and are not updated in a meaningful way until lineups are revealed. And in markets where there is less day-to-day beat coverage of those local MLS teams, such as New England, health issues within the group slip through the cracks. BS. First off, there is no more committed day-to-day beat group out here than the New England beat group. So, Ian, slow your roll.
Are you arguing with yourself or with Ian?
But I do think there is something to be said about that. Injury report came out Wednesday. We're recording on Thursday.
Right.
Came out Wednesday. We don't hear anything really until Saturday.
Yeah, but what if something like the thing is though?
But my point is they should be updating it every day as
Right.
soon as we get into that
But
window.
every league is guilty of this, and the NBA is going through something right now with players' time management and whatever the hell they call it now. And there's going to be a rule in place now with incentives from the NBA based on how much. I mean, in order to qualify for MVP, you have to play a certain amount of games, so and so. NFL, they have game time decisions. I mean, Tom Brady was questionable for 15 years straight on the injury report. So it's not as if the other leagues are necessarily utilizing the injury report accurately. I mean, as somebody who plays fantasy sports, and I don't really sports bet, but as far as fantasy sports goes, I know I'm waiting up until the last minute. That can affect lines in sports betting too. So I think this is kind of BS. It was probably what's this person's name?
Tom
Ian McQuillan.
Ian Quinlan's
Ian Quillan. Now you got me screwed up.
Quillan's introduction to MLS period, and had a deadline of Sunday night to write a report. I think it's kind of BS. I do think that it is a little the injuries are a little vague in MLS, but I don't really think that they're not any more detailed in any other league in professional sports here in the United States. I think this is just an issue in general.
I don't disagree with that, but also just to take you a little behind the scenes, because Tom's pretty dialed in. We had no idea about that. You would normally text us that off the record, like, "Hey, I'm hearing this, so be ready for this."
How much do we know about it now?
That's my point. Is like we're texting minutes before the game, like Carlos Heel's not playing tonight. It's kind of wild.
And take me out of it for a second because I don't care. Seth Maycomer, as tapped in as I am, and he's reporting about Carlos after the fact. So it's not that things get through the cracks, Ian, because we don't have a beat reporter out here. It's dealing with the Bruce Arena era of coaching.
That's a big J calling out little J's.
That's
not cool.
That's not cool.
You should have had him.
There are no little people, Michael. Buddy Cianci said that.
We should have had him on the show.
We might.
No.
Why not?
No.
Argue with the
I'm
sports
call
better.
out sick that day. The thing is
Or is Tom going to run behind the camera
I
and then
don't
do
know.
the interview with himself?
Right, exactly.
No.
It's going to be Tom, and then Tom leaves the room, comes back with a mustache on, and it's Ian Quillan.
Yeah.
So anyways, I just found it interesting that it's putting a spotlight on something that we have been kvetching about for years here with Bruce Arena's transparency behind injury reports.
Think about Bo. The same thing happened with Bo last year where we were in the press box and then it was like he was not available that night. And
Right.
we were like, wait, where's Bo? What happened?
When did this happen?
And then you find out, look, he had a knock at practice. So this has been happening.
Right. It's been happening. It happens all the time. I mean, there's last-minute scratches in every league. I think MLS, Revolution, Bruce Arena, they give you the details that they want to give you. At the end of the day, they don't care about the sports book.
Yeah, if I'm them, it does. I would
It
do the
makes
same
no
thing.
difference. And honestly, if it was up to them, they wouldn't give us any information.
It's true. And if we were them, we wouldn't do that
Why
either.
would you- if I'm a player who's got a knock and I'm trying to play through it, the last thing I'm trying to do is focus on
Absolutely.
we got to inform the people.
It's not about, but it's not
And
about
for your
that.
coach, it's the same thing. Like, I'm not going to let them know
It's not about the players
that-
and the coaches. It's not about the players and the coaches. It's about the league. Because if I'm the league, I want to attract more eyes. I want to attract new people. And this is part of the article that Ian gets to. It's a self-inflicted wound to a product that MLS is counting on people paying a subscription fee for in the form of an MLS season pass.
What is
So
my confusion here is if you're advertising that your star players are not going to be there, and I'm not saying that they should do this or that they do this. This is just being devil's advocate here. Your point is that they should be transparent about this to advertise their stars, but that star might not be playing that weekend? Is that what you're trying to tell me? How does that work?
You want to you want to bring in, because sports gambling, let's be honest, it is at a fever pitch right now, and it's not going down.
No, it's only going to continue to go up.
You want to get, especially with the World Cup bump that we're seeing.
Don't tell Kyrie.
You want to have exactly. You want to have as many people getting into this thing as early as possible. And if they're going to see that their bets that they're putting in are pretty much, their thought process going into the game doesn't matter because information changes 20 seconds before a kickoff. I mean, that's kind of bad.
But the Revolution, they lost 4-0, but they could have won. Let's just, for a hypothetical purpose, they could have won 2-0, and then this article would have never been written. So that's part of gambling. That's why we say, in all honesty, to play responsibly, bet responsibly, because that's part of it. You're gambling on what's going to happen.
And I hope that doesn't come off as tongue in cheek when we say things like that.
I said that last week too. Like we are being honest and serious,
because I know it can be a real issue, and like anything in life. Moderation, you can control it. That's great. It can be a very fun thing. I don't think that gamblers, right? If they were into sports betting prior to mobile betting being live in Massachusetts. It's been live in Rhode Island for some time now for our New England listeners. I don't think an injury report is going to deter a sports bettor from betting.
Yeah, I still think
it's still if they're guaranteed to be able to watch their bets live by subscribing to. I don't think it's as big of a deal as it's being made in that article. Could they be better? Yes, we could all be better. But I don't think that it's that serious.
who is perfect? Nobody's perfect. None of us are perfect, but we try to be perfect.
Let's turn into a PSA.
Okay. We're done. The Revs take on Nashville
What a show,
SC
guys.
on a great show.
What a show.
Hopefully it gets uploaded. Saturday night.
Oh, come on. Why? We didn't need to do that. That is an unveiled shot. That was not – I had nothing to do with that. You know
what that is? You know what that is, Michael?
Yes. That is the greatest photograph in human history, and we should have it.
That was an unwarranted shot fired.
God, I'm so glad you used that photo. I do have to upload a different surprise there soon.
Revs-Nashville, Apple, 7:30.
Lori Lindsey,
Saturday
thank
night.
you. John Chesto from the Boston Globe, thank you.
Bruce.
Great. Thank you.